Hello, my name is Benjamin Jörrissen. I'm from Germany and I'm professor of education with a special focus on culture and aesthetics. And at the same time, I'm shareholder of the UNESCO Chair in Arts and Culture and Education at the Friedrich Alexander University Erlangen-Nürnberg. I am pleased and honored to have been asked to give a talk about the issue of digitalization in arts and cultural education. And I chose this title that you see here, Digitalization in and of Arts and Cultural Education, Challenges and Opportunities. So let me first introduce myself a bit and my part of my team at the UNESCO chair, Tanya Klepatsky, in this case. So if you want to know more about our work as a UNESCO chair, you could just look up this URL. And yeah, I wanted to show you a bit of my university. Unfortunately, this is not the place I work. It's the main building, this wonderful castle that our university president and administration resides in. And I should not forget to mention that the presentation slides of this talk will be made available either by ISME and or on my website, in any case on my website. So there's a lot of information to be covered here in the next hour or so. And you don't have to jot everything down. You can just download the presentation slides afterwards and then find every information and link there. And by the way, this will be under a Creative Commons license so that you are allowed to make use of this presentation also. My talk will have two parts, quite simple. The first part will be about the scope of change, digitalization in culture, arts, and education in these three realms. And the second part will be about the deepened understanding of digitality and will provide insights from recent research in arts and culture and education. And just so that you are not getting nervous about this understanding digitality thing, while digitalization, of course, is a topic that requests the inclusion of media theoretical thoughts and media science, I try to not include media theory as much as possible. So I use it as less as possible in this talk because I think it complicates things very much and the main points can be made understandable without diving into this mostly philosophical kind of theory. So let's just start and dive right in with these aspects of change that I really only want to sketch. I think you know a lot already about this, but of course I want to, so to say, get everyone into our boat here. At least this is German saying, get everyone into your boat. And just talk a little about this kind of transformations that you may or may not know about very shortly. So the first one being digitalization in culture, cultural changes. And here you see quite a funny or unfunny picture where Bird from the Sesame Street is right beneath, right besides Bin Laden. And what is that referring to? It's referring to a talk and an article that the late Mark Poster, who was really an insightful researcher on media theory, history, and digital change overall, gave as early as in 2002 and published that in 2003 and 2006. And this he referred to an event that took place right after 9/11 in Bangladesh, where there has been an Islamist demonstration, and they had this demonstration poster there with Bin Laden in several roles as a leader, a spiritual leader, as a teacher, as a fighter, and everything. And one of the pictures showed Bin Laden together with Bird from the Sesame Street, and of course, the world, in that case, the New York Times published this photo, and everyone was asking how this would come about and what would it mean. Would mean that the Islamist demonstrators wanted to show the West that it made use of the most iconic figures of Western culture or whatever. It turned out that it was simply the case that this agency that had to put together these poster very quickly just went onto the internet and just gathered several photos of Bin Laden. They just didn't see that. Actually, no one was concerned about this bird on the demonstration, and it turned out that the agency that put together the pictures really didn't notice earlier than when they received the call of the New York Times asking how this came about. So this is interesting, and I won't talk about this article. I don't have the time and really recommend to read this. You can find it online. It's fascinating and still fascinating. I just want to point out that this kind of globalization and this kind of change really had to be registered in 2002, 20 years ago, and now it's I think it's what we are really aware about in complete normality. So this is the pace of change, so to say, that we can say now when we read these sentences like here, interpretive practices must accordingly recalibrate themselves to the conditions of the planetary culture, and that we have to know that there are different cultural practices and values when we go on the internet. This is just the normalist part of our everyday culture today. So from the globalization of culture, which is deeply intertwined with digitalization and digital technology, to the everyday culture, of course, you know this, how digitalization changed communication, how it changed consumption, how it changed our working lives, and how it changed how we play. How algorithms changed modes and ways or means of self-expression. For example, the selfie phenomenon is a striking one with regard to aesthetics and with regard to the question of why on earth would people put so many pictures of themselves on the internet. And of course, there's an answer for that, and a scientific one. And for example, the question, the phenomenon of quantified self that we had several years ago, that became famous several years ago. It changed, algorithms changed our usage and meaning of memory, and which is very much attached of what we are as persons, as subjects. It changed our modes of gathering, our modes of sociality from smaller communities to the broad and disseminated networks that we're living in nowadays. It changed the ways we make decisions. I will be talking about this later on. And it changes all this on all these levels of our being, on the affective level, in the affective economy and the attention economy, driven by triggering effects like we have seen in the last 10 years, how even political processes are facing vast changes because now politics is made by triggering effects with pictures and videos that we receive in our echo chambers that we voluntarily seem to live in today. On the levels of affectivities, and also, of course, of the level of aesthetics and of the level of how we get to know things. And it changed, by the way, a thing that we as arts educators are very much concerned about, creativity itself. So creativity, as the German cultural sociologist Andreas Reckwitz wrote in this translated book some years ago, and the invention of creativity, has become a dispositive of power. So it's a means of power, a means that we have to subject ourselves to we have to nowadays we have to be creative individuals. We have to show that we are creative individuals, and so this is a new everyday imperative in an aestheticized society. Of course, especially in this aestheticized society is happening on the internet. So let me draw a first conclusion or pose a first thesis. Arts education, I would say, has to develop its own strengths in order to support digital empowerment in a culturally changed world as it is. So Next subtopic would be changes in and of the arts. So digitalization is connected to the arts at least since the 1970s, maybe a bit earlier. So when artists and non-artists used digital computers and digital technologies to produce pictures such as patterns that replicate themselves and change themselves, driven by software and stuff like this. You may know this. So I'd like to start rather with glitch art that made use of a specific sophisticated use of specific properties of digital files, such as JPEG files or MP3 files in music. And these files are, as you may know, packed data, compressed data, and these are very complex data structures. And if you change anything within this data structure, the result, when unfolded by software to a piece of music or an image, will have these kind of errors inside that are smeared throughout the images, at least past the point where the error has been deliberately introduced by the artist, and this is much more than in painting the use of or in drawing the use of this pencil or that pencil. So this is a very, very new kind of making artistic objects. But this is more digital art. So I'd like to talk about the post-digital art. And what do I mean by post-digitality, by the way? So with this, I mean that digitality is so deeply embedded in our everyday lives and in our infrastructures also, that it seizes that the distinction between the digital and the non-digital does not make much sense anymore. So this is a kind of shift, okay? So, and post-digitality means that the digital structures are also effective where you maybe don't have a computer there or a gadget or a smartphone there. Digital structures start to restructure the way we perceive the world. And into the internet, post-internet art movement, like 10 years ago or so, a bit more, registered this kind of intertwinement between what has been formerly called the physical versus the virtual then, and started to work with that. And for example, Arti Vierkant, the artist, created objects that were neither physical nor virtual, objects that were just a representation of the other part at every point of time. So what we see here is a material printout of a virtual object that changed itself with every exhibition. So it's somewhere in between the physical and the internet representation. Or another example here with from Lawrence Abu Hamdan, the art exhibition called Earshot. Actually, this is based on audio ballistic analysis that were evidence at a trial. And the event this is related to, there was a demonstration in the occupied West Bank of Palestine where two young, two teenagers, male teenagers, were shot, although the police allegedly only used rubber ammunition. And then all the digital recordings that have been made, and as you know, there are many digital recordings nowadays of any event, had been gathered together, and the visual and the positional and the audio data have been analyzed and related to one each other. And by means of this is what had been possible to reconstruct the sound signatures of the projectiles that have been fired by the policeman on the demonstration. And now the sound signature of a rubber projectile is very different from the signature of a live ammunition, because it's faster and it's moving differently through the air and stuff like this. And by means of this kind of reconstruction, it could have been shown that one policeman then used deadly live ammunition and killed these two teenagers then there. But the interesting thing is the same material, and this is post-digitality, the same material then became part of this artistic process. And the artistic process for this installation earshot, for which Lawrence Abu Hamdan then received the well-renowned Namjoon Park Media Arts Award in 2016. And I think this is a very interesting example of how the borders of arts dissolute into politics and dissolute into these kind of everyday life recording that we have. For a complete different example, you may know this. It's from 2018, actually. It's from 2018. It seems decades ago for me, working a lot with these kind of examples now. And this is an artwork, a portrait painting, which is not actually a portrait painting, but it's a computer print out on canvas, which has been created by a deep learning network, a deep reinforcement learning network, a so-called artificial intelligence that had been programmed and fed with data by the Paris-based arts collective called or named Obvious. So this is what they call themselves. So they fed this kind of learning network with all the visual data of new European art history, either modern or since Renaissance, I don't know. And then this system began to make its own artwork. And of course, it's really discussable if this is a genuine work of art or something that just resembles a work of art. So I would say this is technological mimesis of artistic creation. And maybe it's not that surprising. Surprising is the fact that it made more than $400,000 at Christie's and not the estimated $7,000 to $10,000. So this is what, of course, always is a dream of technologists, replicating human creativity, and it's very questionable if this really works out. This is a more interesting example in the same realm, and this is Holly Herndon. You may know this musician who works together with her partner, Matthew Dryhurst, and they developed their own artificial intelligence systems called Spawn. And this system is then fed with voice data and sound data, and then produces songs not on its own, but in an artistic process that is that is distributed on this human and non-human actors, so that the artistic creation itself is a hybrid creation. It's a hybrid aesthetic decision-making process that really can't be divided in what the subject or the human creator, the genius artist, had invented by his own or her own, and on the one hand, and what the part of the tools are, merely tools are that did something to that tool. No, it's really an intertwined process where the artificial intelligence, of course, learned from these artists already. So it includes structurally a lot of the personality of the people who work with this. And nowadays we can use it ourselves, because Holly Herndon started this Holly Plus project, where we can upload our own sound data, sound files, and then it will be transformed using her voice data, and then we can download that again. So so I would here come to the second conclusion or thesis. Arts education evidently really has to embrace these contemporary changes in artistic, aesthetic, and creative practices. And this now leads to the third scope of change, changes in and of education. And of course, we are all busy with this kind of change in our working lives. So we know e-learning has been around for at least 30 years or maybe more. And nowadays e-learning gets a renaissance because it's now combined with learning analytics based on vast amounts of data, big data, and artificial intelligence also that draws its own conclusions. And I brought an interesting example from a recent research project, Musicalytics, that has been conducted in Germany, amongst others by the I would say quite well-known and renowned music education researcher Andreas Lehmann-Wermser here. And they, for example, are talking about these intelligent tutoring systems based on AI. And interestingly, they say, I quote, with the help of this technology, music-related content could be taught just like content in other subjects. And this is interesting, right? Because you would have thought, and surely I would have thought, and I still think, to be honest, that teaching and learning in arts education is something that is very different from teaching and learning in other subject fields that are more tied to cognitive processes like mathematics or stuff like this, or natural sciences, MINT. We call this mathematics and informatics and natural and technology. And so it's interesting that they think that this kind of technology is so powerful, so to say, that it would make it possible, especially in the context of out-of-school informal or lifelong learning, to guide these learning processes by analyzing the prior learning behavior, drawing conclusions, and making the next offer. This is quite important, interesting, because it's a kind of creative didactical process that's involved here. So this is maybe the future of teaching and learning in education and in arts and culture education. This is the present. The present is really, I think, characterized by the rise of educational influences and of online education and arts education also. And I brought 3 examples. The first example is Scott's bass lesson. And this is an internet-based bass music education school. And it costs about like $30 a month or so. And actually, I'm a member of this school for 2 reasons. First, I wanted to learn bass guitar, and but the real reason is by my profession, I really want to understand how these internet-based arts education works. So so I became a member of that, and I'm doing kind of autoethnography by experiencing the platform and, of course, thinking about what I see there. And they're covering the whole range, you could say, from the very basic aspects of how to hold a bass guitar and how to prevent injury and everything, up to very, very complex musical pieces and musical information. They teach the techniques, the craftsmanship, so to say, but also the aesthetics. They have videos, hundreds of videos, but they also have live events, and you can send in your own video and get a video feedback on how your progress is. And they have interviews with the most famous bass players, the most famous bass players in the world, so to say, that show their tricks, show their techniques, or talk about how the way they play is connected to aesthetic ideas that they have about bass playing. So this is interesting. And Scott has a YouTube channel with 1 million followers. And the second example is Adam Neely. So he's a New York-based jazz musician, trained jazz musician. And he has a channel that's mainly about music theory. So he's a bass player also. And this started out as a bass channel, but then quickly changed into a music theory channel. And he's also talking about professional practice. But a lot is about analyzing music, talking about music theory, for example, criticizing the Western-centric music theory that usually is synonym with what we call music theory, and it's a very interesting channel. And who would have thought that music theory is so interesting to people that he would have 1.6 million followers there? And the third example is Heinbach. This is a German guy, but the channel is in English. And he's an experimental electroacoustic composer and performer. And he's really teaching how he does what he does. And he's experimenting not only with electronic stuff that you can buy, but he's collecting, he's an enthusiast collector of anything analog, technological, old, so to say, from, for example, medical devices from the 1960s to engineering devices of the 1950s, measuring instruments for frequencies, and he's turning this into oscillators and electronic filters, connecting this to other things, making these soundscapes and music that he does with that. And of course, this is really a niche thing, aesthetically wise, and he has more than 115,000 followers. And I brought some examples, but I don't have the time really to play that. So maybe you want to look this up yourself if you want to get to know these rather interesting YouTube channels. So just had to skip that. So YouTube is not only for non-formal education, an important thing nowadays, like this study of the German Council in Arts and Cultural Education showed in 2019. So this is a study that had 800 young people between 12 and 19 interviewed face-to-face, so quite an expensive study that has been conducted, and it had a huge part of the study were about school and online video usage. And the results were quite surprising because no one knew, at least in Germany, we didn't know at that time how important YouTube would be for school, for formal education and school-related issues. So nearly half of the young people said that the use of YouTube videos for example, for the homework, doing the homework and trying to understand something that they didn't understand in class is important or very important. This is 47% actually at that time say that this is important. So YouTube, this is a conclusion, is already a leading medium and digital cultural venue for young people for education, and not only for recreation and fun. And it's vastly used. And so we see there's an educational actor, YouTube, a company which is completely out of control of the formal education systems and administration, but is already an important part. That I think has some consequences for how we should think about formal education, but it's not the place and time to talk about this here. So, and a third aspect here, last aspects, is gadgets and digital things becoming part of formal, non-formal, and informal creative learning and empowerment. And of course, this goes without saying, this relates to smartphones and smart gadgets such as iPads or whatever in school, or smart boards, so-called smart boards. So I picked a more interesting example of feminist empowerment projects, women's empowerment projects that use the digital audio workstations and similar tools, material tools. I will talk about this stuff in a minute, to empower women to express themselves personally, politically, gaining recognition for the identity that they think they should gain then as women in this example. And there are quite a lot of grassroots projects that are teaching, for example, Ableton Live, if you know these digital audio workstation, to women with this empowerment aspect in mind. So this is interesting too. I'll get back to this. So a third conclusion, arts education needs organizational and professional development in order to adapt to changes in education. And also, I would add, in order to find its own creative and critical voice regarding these changes, because we don't only have to use that and to adapt to this pressure of digitalization. I think arts education has its own views on what is a good education and what is meaningful for the life of young people and people in general, and what makes sense to adapt for creative processes and what maybe does not make so much sense. But in order to assess this, of course, arts education has to know a lot. So I will now come to the second part of my talk. This question of knowledge, understanding digitality. And this part will be based on some insights from recent research in arts and cultural education. And nowadays we have a lot actually of insights on digitalization in arts and cultural education. At least we have this in the German research context, because it has been really vastly funded and broadly funded by means of a research focus area or a special research area that has been funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and under the title of Research on Digitalization in Arts and Cultural Education. And there were 24 universities involved with a research funding of about 10 million euros, which is a lot for a national research funding in arts and cultural education. And as far as I know, it's the biggest research context of this kind in Germany and probably in Europe too. In this research project, Musicalytics, I talked already about, has been, for example, part of this. So I had the privilege to it's still ongoing there, have the privilege to be the leading principal researcher of a meta project that has the task of monitoring the research outcomes of all the projects in this research area. So, and these are, I don't have the time to read this all out, but these are the questions that are asked, with simplified research questions about how post-internet arts changes arts education, or how the virtual museum of the future should look like if we want to attend this in a social manner, communicating with others in virtual museums, or how, for example, digitalization changes dance, a very bodily practice, how digital tools may change dance practices or practices of dance education. And the green fields there are connected to music. So you see that music is, as usual, quite a strong research field here. And there are many questions connected to that. So I will draw very selectively on this, because there's not enough time really to talk broadly about all these research outcomes, and at the same time to give you a structured information about digitality. Of course, if I talk about all the outcomes, it's kind of a mess, because every research project has its own approach, its own field, its own questions, and outcomes really have to be then categorized and stuff like this. So I will not do this, but I will talk selectively about projects that I'm involved in order to make a point and to let you understand what I'm trying to talk about without using media theory. So understanding digitality, and I will. This part will have two subparts. The first part is we need to care actually to understand digitality in arts and cultural education. And maybe you would say, well, yeah, obviously we do have to care to understand this, but it's really not that much the case, at least not in German arts and cultural education. It takes a time to become a subject, and it's really not that widespread. And really not that self-evident to many arts educators, I would say, still in Germany nowadays. It's getting better, but we're on our way, but it took really some time. So second part is we have to understand not only digitality, but also these post-digital cultures that I already talked about. And then we have really to initiate transformative organizational and professional learning. And this is, as you may imagine, the hardest part to achieve. So I will start with the relatively easier part. So we have to care to understand digitality. And as I add here, alternative medialities and materialities. And alternative with that, I mean, other than those your art form, for example, music in that case, is based upon. So as a matter of fact, this is not very convenient for most arts educators. Every artistic practice or every art form has its own unique set of media and material constellations. And more often than not, there's a deep emotional attachment and connection to these material medialities. For example, there's a German saying that about the theater stage actually, and we say it's the deck boards, the wood on the floor, the deck boards of the stage. These are the boards that mean the word, we say in German. I don't know if there's an English expression that's similar. And so it's really about this wooden feeling of walking on the stage. So how it feels, how it sounds, how it smells, the sweat. This is what you hear if you talk with theater enthusiasts, of course, and actors, be it amateur actors or professional actors. So this is what they really love to do. And this is the material mediality of the stage, having this media constellation of stage here and audience there, light here, darkness there, and of course the materiality of wood and stone and chairs and everything, and bodies, of course. Or you have book lovers. Let's take the field of literature education. It's not so well developed, unfortunately. But let's take this one. Book lovers raving about the smell and the feel of real books. Feel, of course, it's just the quality of paper and everything. Smell, well, you have to like it in a way. But in comparison to ebooks, they always say that they would be missing this kind of tactile and olfactory sensation. And of course, we have in the realm of music the sheer presence of the musical experience in a concert hall, the bodily presence, bodily experience, where we seem to be wrapped and cocooned in sound with our whole existence. And this makes this kind of attachment makes it at times very hard to summon up the will to understand, or let alone to appreciate, alternative medialities, digital medialities, which, as seen, of course, introduce changes to the beloved arts form themselves. So this is what I want to talk about now in the first part. And I will use this example of this research project that we conducted, musical interface designs, augmented creativity and connectivity. And what we did there is we acquired a lot of funding for music making things, digital material hybrid musical instruments, but it's more accurate not to talk about instruments, but about things you make music with. So musicking things, digital material hybrid musicking things. And we acquired things like those you see here. Of course, we knew why, so we had a categorization scheme. Don't have the time to talk about this here. And most of those we bought in sets of 5 each, so that we could lend this to participants in our studies. And these were amateurs, young people at our part of the project, and professionals at the music education part of the project. So we had the part of analyzing these things themselves, and then gathering the material from the participants of the study, who also got some action cams that they were supposed to use to tape themselves using these things. So it's a kind of auto videography, we call this. So they had to say about what to film and what to show, and this is interesting research material, of course. So and so we analyzed and compared these things, and we'll not talk about this. We built up categories, codes, and structures in order to understand what's this kind of digital musicking making thing at all, so to say. And by means of comparing these things, you get these kind of higher categories. You can derive these higher categories and get an insight into these things. And for example, we discovered that some of these things are quite one-dimensional with regard to responsivity to bodily interaction, and others are very sensitive and multi-dimensional. So this cajon on the left, for example, it just fires samples, and it doesn't react to. It does react to the velocity of how hard you hit this thing, but the sound is not changing. So you really have only a silent or more louder sound of the same sample, and it really does not sound very good. It's not responding to what we're doing, and we tend to not like these kind of things. Or another aspect is the aesthetic range of spectrum. Some things are rather narrow, and they're rather leading you towards making a certain kind of music, and only a certain kind of music. And other things are really, really complex and complicated, and open up the whole range of music making. So, but then, of course, it takes much, much time to learn these things. Some things have this kind of subjectification. It's a complex term from educational theory. So address us as a subject, and some address us as the typical European modern subject with work, slow achievement, the potentiality of an instrument that lies in the future because you have to it takes years to learn this, expertise, and the ambivalence of this thing because it's always confronting you with a complexity. And on the other side, you have this roly-play thing. And as you see here, the advertisement says, helps you make music in minutes on your Lightpad block. Yeah. So this is fun, instant creation. It's augmented. It's in the present. It's also shiny and colorful. So it addresses the attention economy of internet businesses, and it addresses the affective subjectivity in the first place then. And then we have like the cultural situatedness. Some things are culturally indifferent. Others, like this frame drum here, are inspired by cultural heritage because this is a Japanese company. And usually they make electronic drums. And then they started this project because they were inspired by Asian wooden framed hand drums. And they wanted something like this, as reactive as this, as melodic as and musical and sensitive as these kind of hand drums. And so they started making this. And the first versions were actually round hand drums, and then they wanted to make a difference because it's a digital device, and so they decided to make this edgy design then in order to show the difference. So, but it is inspired by Japanese or Asian musical heritage, but it's open to any kind of music you would make. For example, there's a cajon there, so this is connected to African and South American music very much, and other kinds of sounds that are referring to electronic music cultures. And then we have these culturally situated instruments, like these Eigenharp instruments, which are extremely hard to acquire and to learn, extremely hard really, because they are hypersensitive, really hypersensitive. It would take really years to achieve mastery. And as this company, I think it's still in business, but maybe not very strong in business anymore. It could be that you can't, that this thing really dies out on you, because if something breaks down technologically and the company is not in business, it could be that you can't play it anymore. So you maybe have invested 10 years of learning and mastery, and then would be left on your own with your broken instrument or so. But this is culturally situated, this Eigenharp Pro, because it references all the classical musical instrument of Western classical orchestras. And on the other hand, we have these ostentatively culturally diverse things like this hand drum HPD 20 from Roland, which covers in its presets all kinds of percussion and drums throughout the world, really. Okay, so and then we, as said, conducted these 2 years field research with, in our case, 32 participants who could borrow any of these equipments they chose. And we analyzed the videos, and then we had an interesting insight because we identified a whole range of types of musical orientation, of attitudes. And these were, we call them musical craftsmanship as one type, and the affective emotional orientation as another one, where it's all about feeling and music in your life. And then we have the artistic life, the project of an artistic life, and the aesthetic care of self, where it's really about being an artist in different fields and including this kind of musical thing, maybe in an installation that you're doing or whatever. And we have the aesthetic explorers who just are trying things for the fun of it, for the aesthetic fun of it. We have the technological explorers who are trying things because they're interested in the technological sides of this digital thing, not so much maybe in the aesthetical, in aesthetical details or so. And then we have the outcome-oriented production type that wants to actually record music with this thing. And then we have the outcome-oriented type in the realm of electronic music production and club orientation, where you have your setup in a live situation and doing live electronic music setups. So, and as you can see, and this is an interesting result, at least a part of the digital music and things we included in our study were able to support a very broad diversity of musical goals, habits, and artistic attitudes. And I would say maybe a broader range of attitudes than you would typically find in music schools, at least in Germany. The structural properties of the digital musical instruments that we analyzed are closely related to these habits. So not everything is for every kind of aesthetic or artistic interest, fits these interests. Third thing is, traditional music schools, at least in Germany, rather support only a fraction of these orientations. And then that means that these typology of attitudes we found or developed in the research projects allows for the development of more inclusive digital music and sonic education programs for a broader audience. So this is important. So here we see that these kind of sensitive dealing with musical digital things, not with some kind of aesthetic prejudice or idea or so, but really based on the research, becoming sensitive to what they are in their own respect, then enables to change the way we see music education. And that does not mean to leave the old ways, but to open up a broader spectrum of thinking about music education and whom it is for, actually. So as a conclusion here, we see that the insights into digital technologies and practices may foster a more inclusive arts education and contemporary modes of expression. For example, and this is not what you thought music education should be in the first place. Maybe you did, if you're located in Germany, rather than otherwise, I would estimate. So in fact, it may be music production more than using or mastering musical instruments or even playing actual musical instruments, what it's also about. Okay, second aspect, understanding post-digital cultures. And this is not easy because we have a generational gap here. The older we get, of course, the farther we are away from newer developments in digital cultures. And what I really can testify for as a digital researcher for so many years is that if you're not part of these platforms and networks and using those, it's really, really hard to really understand what's going on there. And in part, it's actually impossible because in some platforms, as you know, you have to be part of an active network in order to see what's going on. Right? It's technically not possible in part to receive any information if you're not part of a network, and you do not become part of a network if you're not actively doing something there so that people will connect with you. So several aspects regarding this kind of digital culture. So we have this talked about influencers I already talked about. And we have these generational aesthetic shifts. And what we saw in our studies is that the aesthetic shifts between generations are really narrowing down. So we're talking about micro-generational aesthetic shifts. So that, for example, people we interviewed at the age of 22 were talking about people at the age of 17 or 18 about their really weird digital things they do and the platforms they use, and they couldn't understand why they would use that. It's only some years now. So we can see that with any new platform that comes up and is then occupied by the early adopters, which are mostly young people then, there is a different kind of digital culture. So it's a quite complex field, and we're dealing with quite significant aesthetic shift there. And I had this here, this example of Emma Chamberlain. It's an influencer, as you can see. And there's a kind of profane aesthetic, which is very, very different from the very optimized aesthetics that the older young people, these somewhat older young people, developed on Instagram, for example, the selfie culture, classical selfie culture. So, and then, of course, we have this kind of influencer phenomenon, which is very interesting because it's not only everything. It's not only just about business and just about being the cutest, nicest. It has a lot to do with this kind of economization of yourself, but it's also about, as you see, this kind of diversity. It's also about many different people that can become quite famous on these platforms. And then we see a different kind of idea of politics arising with these young generation. For example, hashtag-driven everyday politics that we have with these, for example, anti-racist hashtag Karen, or the pro-Trump hashtag MAGA, or the generational conflict hashtag OK or the environmental hashtag climate change and the likes, or hashtag-driven body politics like Corpo Livre or Disability TikTok, for example. So there's a lot of empowerment potential in the platforms that, of course, we assess critically for being very algorithmically optimized, driven by a completely opaque artificial intelligence, making money with all the advertisements and such. So it's a quite ambivalent thing, but we should really closely assess this. Second example on these kind of digital culture are shifts of artistic and creative practices in relation to our traditional genres of arts education. If I say our in an international context, in a global context like this, it's already wrong. So I may say this if I'm giving a talk in Germany, but surely not on a global talk, because the question is, what are our genres? Thing is, in my experience, research experience, for the bigger part, if we talk about genres in arts and in music, in arts and cultural education, we refer to some kind of separated musical genres, like they have been mainly developed in a Western European modernity, and then kind of set as a normal, as a normality of genres. But of course, this is not the case. So in an international view, as you surely know, there are many, many concepts of art and how art is connected, for example, to healing, or how art is connected to spirituality, or how art is connected to education, or how art is connected to the rituals of our everyday life and the way we conduct life. So these intertwinements have been dissolved in the European process, especially. But anyway, whatever arts education you prefer, arts concept, I'm sorry, you would prefer, and the one I know is best, of course, come from my European heritage. In that case, these are changing in the digital realm, and we saw this in another research project we conducted, post-digital cultural youth worlds. This was about shifts in creative practices. And this was a quite complex research design. encompassing online ethnographies we conducted, expert interviews, more than 20 expert interviews we conducted, focus group discussions, 2 bar camps. These are open spaces, participatory open spaces. There's a photo here, in that case, where young people were to set the theme that they would have sessions about. So we didn't set any kind of theme there. They would really decide upon collectively on what's important for them to talk about. So we can use this very, very interesting data. And we conducted also several case studies. So, and what did we experience there? So we saw post-digital transformations of aesthetic, artistic, or creative modes of articulation and experience. And so, and we saw identified 3 subtypes there. The first one we called the transfer. So this is a transfer of traditional aesthetic practices into the digital realm and transforming the practice itself. For example, this is a screenshot of the biggest German virtual choir. I think there were 2,000 singers or so melted together electronically into one song. So of course, this is a different idea of singing in a choir, but also it connects to this kind of cultural heritage. And the second one we call the emergence. Maybe it sounds better in German than in English. So this is the appearance of new digital aesthetic forms of practice. For example, live music coding using the Sonic Pi platform. And the third type we called revival, decidedly non-digital practices like this wooden marble machine that works with like 2,000 or so marbles that are guided through these wooden structures on metal mallets, making music in the end. Yeah, that's completely non-digital, but always staged on internet platforms like this video channel about this marble machine. And then we saw post-digital transformations of the modes of communication and the modes of staging, such as communicating via memes, if you know the meme phenomenon, no time to talk about this, or staging things in the context of tutorials or do-it-yourself videos or whatever. And then we saw post-digital transformations at the level of social forms and cultural orientation. So it's experienced instantaneous networks that were unstable, for example, smart mobs. And we saw, of course, transcultural practices like furry, quilting, manga, and cosplay all over the world. And we saw shifts in the traditional European genres in that case. For example, this interesting thing that they would choose as a session theme on stage. So on stage is in this language of the young people there is everything from poetry slam to science slam to reciting anything or singing or dancing, or it's on stage because they in their everyday lives are in an on-stage situation because their identities are themselves are so much connected to representations on the internet. They are always in this on-stage pressure. Situation, for example. And this is interesting because you see how all these genres that we teach go together in different forms, which not necessarily mean that we have to change our genres, but it's, of course, very important to know what young people make of what we are teaching them if they are not just doing what we expect them to do with that. Of course, if you have a music school, you're seeing young people giving concerts, but this is what you see because you have these music schools and you're kind of planning and these kind of events, of course. So it's kind of a circular perception there. And then, last but not least, we discovered new hybrid forms of distributed creativity, as we have seen already earlier with Holly Herndon, just not with artificial intelligence, but simpler technologies. And this is from a case study we called Lara and Friends making a TikTok video. So these are 2 girls, 12 years old, Lara and Lara, both have the same name, it's anonymized here. And they wanted to make a funny TikTok video because they saw a funny video on TikTok and wanted to make this together with their friends. So these 2 girls, Lara and Lara, were neighbors. They gathered together in the physical space and gathered together with their friends via, this was before COVID, by the way, via the internet. So like nowadays we would have Zoom, they probably used any other video conferencing tool. So this is already in a kind of hybrid space taking place. And then they took yeah, they didn't want to dance themselves and film themselves for TikTok, but they wanted to make a video in the world of Minecraft, where you can just create things and steer your little avatars in this neat world. And so they had a choreography prepared and did things with the avatars and filmed that with their with their smartphones off the computer screen, which is again a hybrid thing between this physical device in space and the screen. They could have captured the screen, as I do now, giving this presentation, but they didn't. It's just natural for them to go from the material right into the virtual space. And so they brought all this thing together. And if you see this process, you will see that production and reception are kind of intertwined. Why are they doing this? Because they saw this like a meme. The on-screen and the in-life melts into a hybrid on-life. The apps like TikTok are enforcing a non-controlled visibility, always online, this on-stage thing, and they're reacting with this by not showing themselves, but these avatars. The algorithms are actants with networkings or rankings, or and the mode of action is augmented, collaborative, and collective. So it's this is a bit more complex here. It's published as a scheme. I won't talk about the whole scheme, but the important thing is, like with Holly Herndon, we have aesthetic actors that are technological actors, like software algorithms, having implied knowledge and decision about how to craft something, how to film something, how to make a gesture, and everything's inside these softwares, right? And on the other hand, we have the aesthetic human actors who do creative things with these, together with these actors. And if I really separate this on the two sides, this is only an analytical separation. In reality, you can really tell one from the other in the process. And I would say this brings us to this point, that insights into cultural shifts and new aesthetic practices of younger generations are crucial for an understanding of how arts education may tell empowering from undesirable effects of digitalization. So these are the two theses from our second part. And this brings me to the much, much shorter third part, how to initiate transformative organization and professional learning process. So we are still at the beginning with this, because, as you surely will know, this kind of a change is not just a voluntary thing of one person alone. It's a change in culture, because all the actor groups, like parents or clients or whoever you are dealing with in arts education, of course, have to participate in this kind of change. And of course, your organization has to, from the leadership down to where the actual work is done. So it's a very, very complex process that requires a lot of cultural changes, and will not be possible without organizational change, which requires certain kinds of leadership, and professional change, which requires a certain kind of mindset. So, and we are actually at the moment applying for a next research project where we try, I hope we get this, where we try to find out how to really find models and schemes to initialize this kind of change project. Just let end with this really, I think, useful model that has become kind of famous in the educational context for a reason, I would say, but it's not really properly published. This is from Mr. Puentedura, and this was a kind of slides from proceeding, which I cite here. And this is called the SAMR model. And you have, and he makes this distinction of how technology is adopted. And the easiest way is substitution. So technology acts as a direct tool or substitute with no functional exchange, such as if you exchange written paper with a PDF or so. And then you have augmentation. technology acts as a direct tool substitute with functional improvement. This is when you not only have flat PDF files, but structured PDF files that maybe have a video embedded, which you can do with a PDF file. So this is an augmentation, so this is getting a bit better. But then you have and this is just an enhancement, then you have the transformative process, and I would say it's a transformative professional and organizational learning process involved here, should be involved there. And this is the modification stage where tech allows for significant task redesigns. And that we have in the example of musicalytics, where the way that musical education didactics and methods work are redesigned and working in different logics then, in different modes, modi operandi then. And the most complex high stage is the redefinition stage, and it's the most interesting one, of course, where technology adaptation allows for the creation of new tasks that were previously inconceivable. And I think that some of the examples that I provided may show how this redefinition is could be thought about and also is necessary because it bears chances and offers opportunities of arts education that may serve to empower people, that may serve to contribute to what is necessary in education in general, that people can gain some kind of digital sovereignty, that people can understand digital technologies, not only to use this for their art and to express themselves, which is of really utmost importance, but also in order to get a grip on what digitality is. And I hope my talk was able to contribute to for you to getting this grip a bit more on digitality. So thank you for your attention, and I will be looking forward, because this is pre-recorded, of course, I will be looking forward to the Q&A we will be having right now. Thank you very much.